a California pastor was secretly banned from being alone with young women at his church. But here's the twist. While that ban was in effect, he ran a nonprofit specifically working with youth and children, by himself, and pulled in over $500,000. And the church? They claim they had no idea. Rick Olmstead, 74 years old, was the senior pastor of VineYard Church in San Luis Obispo, California. He just resigned on December 20th, 2025, but not because he wanted to. An anonymous tip forced the church's hand, bringing back to light something they thought they'd buried 5 years ago. Back in 2020, Olmstead was allegedly caught taking inappropriate photos of young women outside a Trader Joe's. We're talking unsolicited pictures of their backsides. One of the women who witnessed this, Taylor Burns, who happened to be a church intern working at that Trader Joe's, she traced the license plate back to Olmstead's car and reported him to church leadership. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The church dealt with this entirely behind closed doors. No police report, no public disclosure, just what they called a confidential process of confession, counseling, accountability, and restoration. But was anyone actually held accountable? Well, keep listening. So the church board puts Olmstead through this internal process. He temporarily steps back, goes to counseling, and they give him restrictions. Specifically, and this is crucial, he was told he could not be alone with teens or young women. That's in writing. That's documented. By August 2021, just about a year later, the board declares Olmstead has completed his restoration process. They bring him back as senior pastor. And here's the kicker. They never told the congregation why he left in the first place. Think about that. You're sitting in the pews every Sunday. Maybe you have daughters. Maybe you're involved in youth ministry, and your pastor has a documented history of taking inappropriate photos of young women. And nobody tells you. You're not given the information you need to protect your family or make informed decisions about whether to stay at that church. Some members are now saying that if they'd known, they would have left immediately. Others are defending the church, saying they were trying to balance privacy with accountability. But here's my question. Whose privacy? Olmstead's? What about the women who were photographed? What about the families who had a right to know? And we haven't even gotten to the most disturbing part yet. While Rick Olmstead was banned from being alone with young women at his church, he was simultaneously running a nonprofit called Generation Now. And what does Generation Now do? According to their mission statement, they exist to reach, rescue, root, release, and resource the emerging generation of children and youth. Let me say that again. A man who was restricted from being alone with teens or young women at his church was operating a nonprofit focused on youth ministry, as the president and sole employee. How did nobody catch this? According to IRS documents between 2020 and 2024, the exact period when his church restrictions were in place, Olmstead worked 45 hours per week for Generation Now, and he paid himself well. We're talking $578,072 in salary and benefits, plus another $8,706 in travel expenses. That's over $650,000 from a nonprofit supposedly helping kids. Oh, and during most of this time, he was also serving as pastor at a Rise Vineyard, for free. No salary from the church. Which raises the obvious question, was Generation Now just a way to pay himself while avoiding church oversight? When asked about this, the church treasurer, Bryce Moore, said they knew Olmstead had some involvement with Generation Now, but since it wasn't part of his church role, it was outside their area of leadership. I'm sorry, what? You've restricted your pastor from being alone with young people because of inappropriate behavior, and you don't think it's relevant that he's running a youth-focused nonprofit? The same pastor you're not even paying, who's somehow making over $500,000 elsewhere. The church claims Generation Now isn't affiliated with them, so they can't comment on it. But that's a convenient dodge, isn't it? Because the last reported address for Generation Now appears to be a private residence in San Luis Obispo. This isn't some massive organization with buildings and staff. This was essentially a one-man operation. Now, when this story broke in January 2025 through local journalist Chloe Schrager at the San Luis Obispo Tribune, new details emerged that the current church board claims they never knew about. We're talking allegations of inappropriate touching and intoxication that were apparently part of the original 2020 incident but never made it into the official church records. How does that happen? How do allegations get lost or minimized in an internal church investigation? This is exactly why experts say these situations need outside oversight. Law enforcement, independent investigators, people without a vested interest in protecting the institution's reputation. The situation only came back to light because someone submitted an anonymous report to Guidepost Solutions. That's a third-party reporting system that VineYard USA, the national denomination, operates. Finally, someone outside the local church leadership got involved. Rick and his wife Becky, who ran the children's ministry by the way, both resigned in December. The church says it was mutual, that it was affecting the Olmstead's well-being and the church's ability to focus on the future. But let's be real. This only happened because they got caught. If that anonymous report hadn't been filed, would any of this have come to light? The congregation's response has been mixed. Some are angry and hurt, feeling betrayed by the leadership they trusted. Others are defending the church's original approach. The church is now doing what it should have done in 2020, reviewing policies, strengthening safeguards, and working with the denomination on oversight. But here's the thing. This is all reactive. This is damage control after years of secrecy. So what are the lessons here? First, internal church investigations almost never work. When institutions investigate themselves, there's too much incentive to minimize, to protect reputation, to prioritize restoration of leadership over protection of the vulnerable. That's not cynicism. That's pattern recognition based on hundreds of similar cases. Second, financial transparency matters. A nonprofit pulling in over $500,000 with one employee and a residential address should raise red flags. Where's the accountability? Where's the board oversight? Who's checking the books? Third, and maybe most importantly, silence protects predators, not victims. When churches hide misconduct in the name of privacy or restoration, they're making a choice about whose interests matter most. And time and again, we see that it's not the victims. It's not the congregation. It's the institution and its leaders. I want to be clear. I don't know Rick Olmstead's heart. I don't know if he's genuinely struggled with something he regrets or if there's a pattern of predatory behavior. What I do know is that the systems that were supposed to protect people failed. And that failure was enabled by secrecy, by prioritizing a pastor's reputation over transparency, and by assuming that internal accountability would be enough. It wasn't. What do you think? Should churches be required to report these situations to authorities? Should there be external audits for religious nonprofits? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where you all land on this. If this story concerned you, hit that like button and subscribe because we need to keep having these conversations. Share this with someone who needs to see it. And hey, stay vigilant, stay informed, and don't let institutions tell you that secrecy is the same thing as grace. I'll see you in the next one.